Okay, guys, coming to you with the latest in the Low Country, South Carolina real estate updates. We're going to take a look at the data, pretty much the first 2 months of 2025 as we're looking into the spring market. And then Chris and I are going to talk about the ups and downs, pros and cons, and best strategies related to multiple offer scenarios. You don't want to miss out, so let's get after it. Okay, guys, here we are. We're approaching the end of February. Chris, can you believe it? We're almost into March. We're shooting today on a beautiful spring day in the Low Country, which we're grateful for after, if you didn't hear about it, our snowmageddon that we had not all that long ago, less than a month ago. It's hard to believe that we had that amount of snow on the ground, et cetera. But, we're coming to you guys today just to kind of touch base about what's happening in the local market. Let's go over some stats, Chris, if we can. If I just bring this up to speed, last year, so much of what we saw was pretty much flat from 2023 number. The listings is pretty much on par to between 23 and 24. Number of pending sales was eerily similar to 23, 24. And frankly, the closed sales wasn't that far off either. No major double-digit kind of fluctuation. So let's look at that right now and talk about, okay, what's happening? Let's start with listings. Number of new listings coming on the market. We're approaching 12% more new listings that have come on in let's just call it roughly the first 2 months of this year, right, versus the first 2 months of last year. That's homes and villas, right?
Yeah, homes and villas up almost 12% in the first 60 days-ish. And the other thing is listing delay. These are listings that are teed up to come soon to market. Mm-hmm. We're getting close to the highest we've really ever seen that. We're at 180 listings that are coming soon to market. And that's up, this time last year, it was probably around 100 or less.
So you see that as an indicator. Listing delay is a status in the MLS. A lot of folks that are buying real estate know that our agents have access to that before the consumer has access to it. So it's sort of a tell about what volume of listings is happening. And I know we don't exactly have that data point from this time last year, but it might have been around 100 because I know we talked about that number ballpark. So you're talking about not quite doubled, but up significantly. And that's a good indication of the fact that there's more property coming to market and probably will be over the next month or two.
Well said. That's just a way we can kind of stay ahead of it.
Yeah.
What's actually happening.
So we look at the number of transactions that are taking place and what's happening in those transactions. Last year, we were hanging out about 98% sales price to list price ratio. I think we're seeing that edge down just a little bit.
Just a tad at the start of the year. This is just based on recent closed sales this year.
Yeah.
But that's just right now around 97.4%.
Yeah.
So just tads down a little bit. The other thing to look at is the sale price to original list price ratio.
Okay. Yeah.
This is an important stat. It's tucked in just under 95% now, but that gives us an idea of price reductions. Are they happening in the market? And yes, they are.
Right. Because original list price is, okay, that's where you put it on the market. List price is different because that's the stat that gets recorded when it goes under contract. It's not recording, even though it's in the history what the original was. So that fluctuation is important to study because it's reflective of where we are seeing some price reductions in certain segments.
Sure. The good news is, though, the number of transactions is holding pretty steady.
Okay.
We've had about 650 or so new transactions that have closed in the first couple months of the year, same as last year. But the good news is median prices are still slowly edging up.
Yeah.
And that's reflective of the demand coming into the market. We still have good demand and we still see some property selling at a good price.
Okay, so this might, listen, before the COVID market, and it seems so silly now that that's been now 5 years back, okay, but it seems so silly to still reference that, but it was such a dramatically different marketplace than we'd ever seen before in decades leading up to that. And leading to that, I could never think of a situation where we had two buyers that were interested in the same property at the same time, right? Multiple offers, like what is that? And then COVID came, and of course, I think everybody understands that story nationwide, certainly locally. But it might surprise people to know that that's still happening to some extent in some segments of the market. Let's talk a little bit about what that looks like on the buyer side, the seller side, how to be prepared. So what are the dynamics of that? What's the first couple of things that occur to you?
Well, I think it's important that we talk about that scenario because we've had a couple that have happened in the last week or two just here internally. And what I'm finding is people maybe have heard about it, but people aren't necessarily expecting it until they're thrown into that mix. So all of a sudden you've listed a house or you want to go buy a house, and then all of a sudden you're in this multiple offer scenario. And so I kind of wanted to talk about maybe what to expect in the mind of a seller, in the mind of a buyer, and things of that nature.
Okay, so let's talk about like the seller side. What do sellers need to be thinking about in that regard, just from that past experience? Like I said, because we had a couple wild rides just over the last week where we were trying to navigate and trying to let the seller understand, at what point do you call for a highest and best offer scenario when you all of a sudden you got one offer, then the next offer, and you're forecasting, it's like the interest is here where we might get more offers. What does that look like, and how does that evolve?
Well, first off, for a seller, they probably get pretty excited because all of a sudden we got multiple offers. This tends to happen early on in a listing. It's rare to see a multi-offer scenario.
Listing on.
Yeah, but you put something on, and what that indicates, some might say, gosh, did we underprice it or something like that? All of a sudden we have multiple offers. Yes, that could be the case, but what's happening there is the market's going to actually dictate where it's going to sell. So that's one scenario. The other scenario is you have pent-up demand. Maybe you have a special property. Maybe you don't have any competition. Maybe you have a piece of property that the market's been waiting for.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden you put it on, and those folks that have been hyper-focused on that type of real estate, they come into play.
Typically because they've already looked at everything else that's on the market and it's not scratching the itch. And then this jumps on and they're like, we got to move quickly. And there might be more than one person looking to do.
Sure. And so from a seller's perspective, this is, instead of going back and countering the offers one by one, it's a way to just let the offers improve coming to you.
Sure.
Okay. So it's a way of leveraging having multiple interest in a property and being able to say to all the buyers, look, in all fairness to everybody, we want everybody to have a shot at this. So bring us your highest and best offer, and we'll review all of them.
Yeah. And we've had sellers that have said, listen, in fairness to us, we want to have everybody that's interested see the house.
Yeah.
And we've had buyers that have been involved on the other side of that scenario that have said, we get it. We understand. Of course, if I was the seller, I would want to let everybody reasonably within a reasonable period of time see the house as well. The challenge is that a buyer who's really wanting to buy the house is only willing to wait so long for that process.
Right. I think a couple things are important for a seller. One is fairness.
Yes.
Okay. You want to be fair to the marketplace. So you want to actually, all you want to understand are the terms, and not just the price, but all the terms of the offer, and compare them side by side.
Yep.
The other thing to consider is a reasonable amount of time to sit on this or wait. Some sellers might say, hey, let's push this out a couple weeks and see if all the offers keep coming in. But what we find is buyers don't have a tolerance for that.
Correct.
Buyers will have a tolerance. First of all, they're going to be a little disappointed that they didn't get a chance to negotiate directly with the seller up front. The other thing they're going to think of is, gosh, if the seller's out there just fishing for other offers and trying to throw them into the mix, which is not really what needs to happen there. So a reasonable amount of time to respond, and to respond to everybody at the same time.
And I think part of that too is to acknowledge that if there is that, and this is sort of age old, it's even like the notion like the first offer is your best offer. Forget the multiple offer situation, but that whole notion that like right out of the gate, there's someone who's strongly interested. Sometimes sellers can think, well, if the first person did that, then the next 10 people will do that. And that's not always the case. So there's a little bit of a slippery slope thought process on that, where sellers have to be careful to understand that even if there's a wave, that first wave of pent-up demand on the product to begin with, that doesn't mean that in 2 weeks it's going to be there. In fact, this might be that magic moment for them really to capture the market, be excited, be enthused, be proud and honored that there's that level of interest, but navigate it professionally to make sure we don't isolate anybody in the process is sort of a main goal too. If you're trying to give a fair opportunity reasonably for everybody to have a chance at.
Sure. Another thing that the seller might see in this scenario are escalation clauses.
Right.
And this is something that really our marketplace never really saw before COVID. But an escalation clause is basically a buyer saying, hey, I'm going to offer X, but I will pay this amount over any other offer that comes in. And so that's interesting because, and you have to take that carefully.
Sure.
because you need to look at a couple things. One is, are they just trying to outbid somebody by $1,000, or is it going to be actually worthwhile? Me personally, if I had two offers and one was just going to bump over 1,000, but they originally offered a lot less, I don't see the excitement in that. So there's some considerations behind those escalation clauses. The other thing in the escalation clause that a seller would want to look at is many have a cap. So they'll match or beat a price up to a certain cap. Well, guess what? That cap tells a seller, could be where they end up wanting to, they could perform. So it's a buyer kind of opening up their hand of cards to the seller and telling them where their tolerance.
Or it's demonstrating to them that they are a strong buyer. They may not have to go to that number of negotiation, but it's demonstrating their intent, their strong interest in that.
Sure. And then if you kind of flip over to the buyer side of it, we see a couple things in the marketplace. One thing, we see buyers that they go, I don't want to get into a bidding war. Okay. Think about the mind shift of that, though. Instead of thinking, I don't want to go into a bidding war, look at this as an opportunity. There's a property that people want. Okay. So that's good. You're drawn to something that other people want. Don't think of it as a bidding war. Think of it as an opportunity to present your offer and be considered. Because I've actually seen folks withdraw because they don't want to get into a bidding war. Their original offer would have won out.
If they just stuck it out.
Just stayed in.
And if you're doing a professional job as the listing agent, obviously you're not disclosing the open terms of the other offers, et cetera. But as you're sitting back observing that, you're like, man, it'd be great if you just stuck in, because you guys really might have a chance at it. And I'm really glad you said that, because I think bidding war, and I get it. I understand that. I understand that mentality, but I don't like the terminology, because at the end of the day, it really is highest and best is really give it your best shot so that you can sleep well at night knowing that you did the best you could to buy the house you're excited about. And I liked your comment about confidence. Guys, if there are multiple people bidding on this property at the same time, you've picked a good property.
Yes.
And it's going to give you a good sense of confidence that, hey, this is probably worth what they're asking. It might be worth more than what they're asking, but I found something that's a good value. It's got real value around it, and that you should act on that with confidence and not necessarily back away just because there's somebody else interested.
Yeah. And if a buyer approaches this the right way, they're going to do a couple things. One, they're also going to present their highest and best. Don't present an offer under these terms in this scenario and expect then there be a negotiation after the fact. There could be, yes, but don't expect it to happen. So put it out there. If you're willing to pay X, go ahead and put X out there. The other thing you want to look at as a buyer is what are the other terms? How clean does it look? How long is your due diligence? Think this through with your agent so that the offer that's going to the seller is compelling, not only in price. It shows that you're going to perform, and you're going to perform without a lot of hassle.
Closing date, is that attractive? Post-closing occupancy, can you buy it as is, subject to satisfactory inspections? Are there other terms or hot buttons? And that's a main thing too for buyers. A key tip there is have your agent get in touch with the listing agent and say, what are the hot buttons for the seller? Like, what's most important? Because, that seller may be trying to solve for time as much as money. And so they may have a sensitivity about those timelines or having post-closing occupancy or whatever the case is. So doing your due diligence on the agent side and advising the buyer on maybe how best to structure that offer goes a long, long way.
It really does. And that helps. Having that communication, learning from the seller what they want in an offer, because it might be stuff that's easy to do. And of course,
here's my maybe one last point from my perspective is that we're not seeing multiple offers on every property that comes to market. Okay, we get it. But it's also not just reserved for the hotter market, sub-market areas, not just the communities where there just seems to be still a lot of fire in the market. We have seen multiple offer scenarios develop in markets that maybe have a fair amount of inventory, but all of a sudden, a seller's come to market, or maybe they made that price adjustment, and now they've hit the sweet spot, and there are people wanting to perform on that. So don't be blindsided by that, thinking like, gosh, there's a ton of inventory, and so I'm never going to have to deal with that. You might actually have to deal with that even in a quieter marketplace if a piece of inventory comes on and is super hot.
Yeah, the bottom line is have a plan.
Yeah.
Don't get scared. have a plan and approach it the right way. And it might end up, if you're a seller, it might end up resulting in more favorable terms. And if you're a buyer, it might end up resulting in you getting a property that a lot of folks want.
Yeah. And making sure you're listening to your agent, because they are right ways to do these things and they're wrong ways to do these things.
It can backfire.
It can backfire. So you got to be super smart about it. So love the discussion. Love that we're seeing some of that happen in the market, because there's still a ton of demand in the low country. We're continuing to see it based on the stats we've seen. And it's exciting. So, all right, guys, we'll talk to you soon.